Did white women just watch slavery happen? Dive into a journey through history and modern analysis to uncover the untold stories of power, privilege, and oppression. Witness the role of white women in the dehumanization and exploitation of black men. The truth about how white women treated black men during slavery is a story of reflection, education, and the path toward a more equitable future. Greetings and welcome. I'm Carolyn A. from GettingToTheRoots.com, ready to empower you with tools, resources, and inspiration to craft a legacy that's uniquely yours. Uncover your family's place in history. Learn to celebrate and share these stories through reunions and blogging, connecting your family across distances. Join me on this incredible journey. Together, let's uncover the stories that have shaped us, celebrate the diversity of our heritage, and ensure that the legacies of our ancestors are remembered and cherished forever. Let's dive in. In exploring the intricate web of power, privilege, and oppression that characterizes the history of slavery in the United States, it becomes crucial to understand the multifaceted roles played by white women within this system. Despite the traditional portrayal of white women as mere onlookers to the atrocities of slavery, a deeper dive into historical records reveals a more complex narrative. White women, particularly those within slaveholding families, navigated a unique position of social and economic power that was directly tied to the institution of slavery. What are the social and economic power dynamics involved? In the society of the southern United States before the Civil War, the social position of white women depended a lot on their family status. This status was usually higher if their family owned more enslaved people. This ownership was not merely symbolic but conferred significant economic benefits and social prestige. Women, in some cases, inherited slaves from their parents as part of dowries, marking them as valuable assets that enhanced a woman's marriage prospects and, by extension, her social capital. Despite being legally and socially positioned under the authority of their fathers or husbands, white women wielded considerable influence within the domestic sphere. This influence extended into the management of enslaved workers tasked with domestic duties and childcare. White women's daily lives and their ability to fulfill societal expectations of hospitality, household management, and motherhood were intricately linked to their reliance on the labor of enslaved people. This dependency created a complex relationship where white women often directly supervised and controlled the lives of enslaved individuals within the home. How did domestic duties intersect with slave labor? The reliance on enslaved labor for domestic chores and childcare was not merely a matter of convenience, but a manifestation of white women's power within the plantation economy. Enslaved women and men were often assigned roles that directly catered to the comfort and status of the mistress of the house, from cooking and cleaning to rearing the children. This arrangement underscored the domestic sphere as a site of power for white women, where their authority could be exercised with little oversight or interference. How were white women active participants in the slave economy as owners? There are many records showing that white women owned enslaved people on their own. This goes against the idea that they were not actively involved in slavery. Legal papers, wills, and sales records show that white women got enslaved people through inheritance, bought them, sold them, and even looked for those who escaped. These actions highlight the direct involvement of white women in sustaining and benefiting from the economy of slavery, underlining their complicity in the system. This examination of power dynamics sheds light on the critical but often overlooked role of white women in the slaveholding system of the antebellum South. The social and economic influence of these women was closely linked to slavery. This shows a complicated situation where they relied on, had control over, and were directly involved in hurting and taking advantage of enslaved men and women. To fully understand the history and lasting effects of that time, it's important to recognize this aspect of slavery. The role of white women in the dehumanization and violence against enslaved men is a critical aspect of understanding the dynamics of slavery. This participation was not only physical, but deeply psychological, embedding a legacy of trauma and oppression that reverberated through generations. How did white women contribute to the psychological dehumanization of enslaved men? White women participated in the psychological dehumanization of enslaved men through various means. The use of racial slurs was a common practice, serving not just as derogatory epithets but as tools to reinforce racial hierarchies and the perceived inferiority of black people. These slurs were part of the daily vernacular, normalizing a culture of contempt and othering that stripped enslaved men of their humanity and dignity. Beyond verbal abuse, white women often dismissed the emotions and experiences of enslaved individuals, treating their suffering, desires, and personal losses with indifference or scorn. By denying the enslaved their basic humanity, white women reinforced the ideology of white supremacy and the social structures that upheld slavery. This psychological violence was pervasive, affecting every aspect of life for those enslaved, from the denial of familial bonds to the refusal to acknowledge the pain and brutality inflicted upon them. How were white women implicated in the physical violence against enslaved men? The involvement of white women in physical violence against enslaved men, whether direct or indirect, is a darker aspect of this history. Instances where white women turned a blind eye to the punishment meted out by overseers or slaveholders were not uncommon. This silent complicity served as tacit approval of the violence, reinforcing the acceptability of such actions within the plantation economy. In more direct instances, white women could incite violence through their words or actions. Allegations made by white women, whether truthful or fabricated, often resulted in severe punishment or even death for enslaved men, underscoring the lethal power of their accusations in a society predicated on the control and subjugation of black bodies. There were also documented cases where white women themselves administered punishments. These acts were not only expressions of their authority and control over enslaved individuals, but also served to reaffirm their status within the racial and social hierarchies of the time. The participation of white women in these acts of violence, whether through direct action, incitement, or complicity, highlights the complex ways in which they were implicated in the system of slavery. What is the enduring legacy of violence and dehumanization perpetrated by white women in the era of slavery? Their involvement underscores the pervasive nature of racial oppression and the collective responsibility of the slaveholding class in maintaining and perpetuating the brutalities of the system. By examining these uncomfortable truths, we confront the full extent of the atrocities committed under slavery and acknowledge the deep scars left on the fabric of American society. This reflection is not only a matter of historical record, but a necessary step toward recognizing the enduring impacts of these injustices and moving toward a more equitable future. How did the power imbalance during slavery impact consent and the outcomes of sexual violence initiated by white women towards enslaved men? The power imbalance inherent in the system of slavery rendered the concept of consent meaningless. Enslaved men, stripped of their autonomy and deemed property, could not freely consent, making any sexual activity forced by definition. In some cases, white women might have seen enslaved men only as things to use for their own sexual pleasure, showing the same attitude that made slavery so cruel. This mistreatment was a clear violation of basic human rights and the abuse of power. What is the lasting psychological and societal impact of sexual violence and exploitation in the context of slavery? The trauma inflicted through sexual violence and exploitation has a lasting psychological impact, not only on the individuals who directly experienced it, but also on their descendants. This trauma is embedded in the collective memory of African American communities, contributing to a legacy of distrust and pain that complicates the relationship between Black Americans and the broader societal structures that descend from the historical context of slavery. The dehumanization and objectification of enslaved men by white women as part of the broader system of slavery contributed to enduring stereotypes and racial prejudices that persist in various forms to this day. These stereotypes continue to influence societal attitudes toward black men, impacting their interactions with the criminal justice system, employment opportunities, and social dynamics. Confronting the sexual violence of enslaved men by white women and its consequences is a crucial step toward healing and reconciliation. Acknowledging this aspect of slavery allows for a more nuanced understanding of the historical and current complexities of race, power, and gender in America. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths and to question the narratives that have historically dominated discussions of slavery and its legacies. How can educational initiatives and community interventions address the legacy of slavery and promote healing? Educational initiatives that provide a comprehensive view of slavery, including the roles of white women in perpetuating the system and their impact on enslaved men, are vital. By fostering a deeper understanding of this history, we can promote empathy, encourage dialogue, and work towards dismantling the lingering effects of slavery's legacy. Community and therapeutic interventions that address historical trauma can play a significant role in healing. Recognizing the pain and suffering that these historical injustices have caused is the first step towards building a future where such atrocities are never repeated. It is paramount in these discussions to avoid any form of victim blaming. The responsibility for the atrocities of slavery and its lasting impacts lies with those who perpetrated and benefited from the system. The enslaved men and women were subjected to unimaginable horrors through no fault of their own. Their resilience in the face of such adversity is a testament to the human spirit and a call to action for all of us to work towards a more just and equitable society. The consequences of the actions of white women on enslaved men and their descendants are a critical piece of the puzzle in understanding the full scope of slavery's legacy. By reflecting on this history with sensitivity and commitment to truth, we can hope to heal the wounds of the past and forge a path toward genuine reconciliation and equality. Addressing the painful truths of sexual exploitation within the institution of slavery, particularly the involvement of white women, is a necessary step toward understanding our collective past. This history, marked by profound inequalities and abuses, challenges us to engage in a critical examination of how these legacies continue to shape our society. We must lean into the discomfort that comes with these revelations to foster a more inclusive and honest dialogue about race. As we reflect on the darkness of the past, let's also look towards the light of a more just future. It's in our power to mend the divisions and to build a society that upholds the dignity of every person. This journey is not just educational. It's transformative, pushing us towards the realization of true equality. And that's a wrap on truth. White women's treatment of enslaved males. We've only scratched the surface of this complex and deeply impactful part of history. To truly understand the breadth and depth of this topic, we encourage you to delve further into the narratives, evidence, and scholarly work that illuminate these intricate dynamics. For those interested in exploring more about this subject, here are a few resources that can provide greater insight and context. They Were Her Property: White Women as Slave Owners in the American South by Stephanie E. Jones Rogers. The Plantation Mistress: Woman's World in the Old South by Catherine Clinton. Aren't I a Woman? Female Slaves in the Plantation South by Deborah Gray White. Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. If you found value in our journey today, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Peace and love.